And I am first going to let Rabbi Anna kind of summarize what was discussed and kind of covered in the first 2 sessions of A Generous Spirit, her discourse, and bring us to currently to where we are today on the topic of money and investing and values around that, Jewish values around that. And then I will introduce our guest speaker, Ed Whitfield, from many organizations, but Seed Commons is the one that we're excited to hear more about today. So Rabbi, would you like to get us started, please?
Sure. So there were a lot of texts that we covered during the first 2 sessions, and kind of broadly in the class, the way we sort of structured the 3 classes is the first class talked about our individual relationship with money or individual attitudes towards money, and Jewish wisdom to bear on that. Then the second class was community and money, and attitudes toward that, texts on that. And then we're hoping that this class will kind of more give us, societal perspectives on money. And, I am not sure, what people's the ways that you were raised with money or thinking about money, but I think a lot of times money is seen as something secular or not holy, or in contrast with the spiritual life. And, it doesn't take a lot of look into Jewish texts to find out that money is considered something that we can use in holy ways, in sacred ways, if we have consciousness and intention around money. In fact, in the Talmud, there was a text that we looked at that says there's no greater discipline in the Torah than the study of monetary law, and money is like an ever-flowing stream. And we talked about how money, another word for money, is currency, and it should flow. It shouldn't be blocked up. It shouldn't be just held onto. It should flow. We should receive money in ways that reflect our values. We should spend money or give money in ways that reflect our value. Money is what makes a society, what it makes a community function. And if there are things that we want to create, we need money to create them. So it's important to have a good, at least constructive attitude toward money, and to look at the ways that we earn money, and to also look at the ways of spending money, and also look at the ways that we might tend to hoard or hold on to money. It talks about in our texts that we should love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our me'od. And that one way of understanding me'od is our abundance. So looking at the abundance in our lives as God-given and a blessing, and that if we have earned all of this, it's with God's blessing, and we should honor God by the flow of money from us as well. And so we also talked about, how much money should we be giving? What is our obligation to community? And it's not a conflict that that money always should be flowing, that we should trust that money will come to us as money flows from us. And currency, money, is something that, again, we shouldn't hold on to. It's part of a flow of blessing that doesn't just start or end with us, but it's something that can connect us for the benefit of the greater good. So look at money as something like that we own or have to keep. And something that's necessarily also scarce, that we are encouraged to look at our lives in a generous way. that just as we should, give generously, so we might be able to also receive in an open flow from the universe. So it's not something I think that you can get in one session. It's really something that requires a lot of focus and living into, because I think that life is definitely poses its challenge, and I think challenges. And in our society, we have been raised with a sense of, independence from other things, that we have to build things, in an independent way apart from everybody else. And Jewish text and tradition doesn't flow particularly from that mindset. It comes from really an attitude of interdependence. And I hope that the more we study this, not just these texts, but this kind of attitude and way of thinking, we can hopefully shift into something, not just a place of more generosity, but more interdependence on other people and of community. And Dara wanted me to also mention that this is a Shemitah year. This is a sabbatical year where we are really being told, our abundance comes from God. Trust God, and give up your holdings and let God feed you. Let God give you of the abundance of the earth. And let your pastures go fallow, let your slaves go free. And it's a really radical leaning into this idea of interdependence and the fact that there is no true permanent ownership of any individual. So again, Shemitah is a whole year. I think it takes at least that to live into that kind of different mindset. And it's something that I think it's appropriate for us to be really learning and studying and growing into throughout this year together at Colomet. So how'd I do, Dara? Was that less than 10 minutes?
Yes, that was great. Thank you, Rabbi. I wondered if you could speak to also in Shemitah the mitzvah or the request to I guess let people out of their loans, right? I'm blanking on the word.
Release people from their debts, release people from servitude. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to speak more about it without really going over time, but that is one of the key parts of the Shemitah year, that we should experience freedom in a lot of ways. That freedom can maybe be a scary thing, but freedom is something that God demands and that our faith demands. So we let go of this idea of ownership over people, over money, over land, so that we can all experience freedom, and so that we can, I think, just come back to being this idea of created in the image of God without these other the status or the class differences that divide us, whether we're owners or whether we have debts or whatever, richer or
It
poorer.
seems to me like, and I had never heard of Shemitah before either, and before this year in our conversation in each event that we're talking about this, but it seems to me like it's a real attempt at re-leveling every 7 years, just to remind us that we're all part of the same community, and that as things get unequal, we're required to re-equalize, and so it's an opportunity every 7 years to re-equalize that.
Yeah, and it's really radical teaching, and we're not even clear that as described in the Torah, that these the description of Shemitah was ever actualized. But I think it's a general awareness and an attitude toward equalizing that we can learn from and, you know, grow from, even in this kind of capitalist society where we're not about to exactly give up our houses. But I think there's ways we can live the concepts of Shemitah.
So that's a great segue into our guest speaker for the day. And I think that as I think our committee has been saying now for a while, we want to always be thinking about putting our money where our values are. It's kind of what we've said a lot. And we've talked about the divestment from fossil fuels movement, which has come up in our environmental and climate change events. And now the conversation has to be, if we do divest from fossil fuels, then where do we reinvest? Where do we invest then? If we're divesting from something that's harming our world, and then where do we reinvest? And that's where our guest speaker is coming in. I would like to introduce Ed Whitfield, who is a lifelong social justice, anti-war, and community activist. Ed Whitfield is originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, and was a longtime anti-war and social justice activist before becoming involved in community development, cooperative development, and philanthropy. He now spends most of his time trying to help communities build self-reliant economies to meet their needs and elevate the quality of life. Ed was co-founder and co-managing director of the Fund for Democratic Communities, and continues to serve on the boards of Seed Commons, which he'll tell us more about today, and the New Economy Coalition. Ed spent 9 years as board chairman of the Greensboro, North Carolina Redevelopment Commission, and was the board chair of Greensboro's Triad Minority Development Corporation before becoming involved with the cooperatives and the world of democratic non-extractive finance. Remember that term. We'll be talking about that. He currently serves as a consultant to community groups on matters of community cooperative economic development and community wealth building, as well as working in the arena of organizational anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion improvement. Ed writes, teaches, and lectures on these matters of importance while balancing this work with playing the blues and eating barbecue, which I hope I get to do with Ed someday. So Ed, please, everyone, welcome Ed Whitfield. And Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone's mutely clapping for you on the Zoom.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased. I understand that a dear friend of mine, Kate Poole, spoke to your congregation, I guess it was last year. And
yes, she did. She was wonderful. And actually she was an inspiration for us to go to Seed Commons to have you come and speak. Okay,
well, that's great. She's a dear friend of mine, doing some really good work with Cordata, her business now. This is a fascinating discussion to be a part of, because I think that it's important to kind of rethink our attitude toward money. There are certainly people who think of it as almost being inherently evil, quoting scriptures that the love of money is the root of evil and such things. On the other hand, it's very clear to me that many people in the United States indeed worship money, which is a strange thing. One of the ways I like to talk about what is wrong with the current structure of the current economic system is that I think it inverts the relationship between that which is sacred and that which is instrumental, which is to say that rather than using people and human life and the quality of the environment on the planet as tools for the purpose of enhancing profit, we should be using the money that is accumulated, business money, capital we could call it, as a tool for enhancing life and the quality of the planet. And so we've really inverted which is sacred, which is life and humanity, for that which should be instrumental, and it should be utilized for the purpose of enhancing life. So that's, part of the basis for thinking about how can we engage in processes to allocate and distribute the access to our community resources in such a way that they principally benefit community rather than simply benefit in further accumulation. And it is in that context that we have come upon this idea of non-extractive finance. The work of Seed Commons is it is a continuation of the work that Brendan Martin and some others did when they went to Argentina several years ago to participate in the recovered factories movement. When during the financial crisis in Argentina, they were able to take what was a relatively small amount of money. I think Brendan said he started out with $50,000 of his own money out of his pocket, to make a bunch of relatively small loans to people that wanted to reopen their factories and make them productive again, when a lot of the factories had been shuttered by the business interests who didn't find them profitable enough to operate, and didn't worry about the fact that this caused untold misery to the toiling people who had been dependent on those factories' operation in order to take care of their responsibilities to themselves and their families. So starting with that work, and then later some work that expanded into Nicaragua, when Brendan came back to the United States, he set up in New York to do that work under the name of the Working World. And it's a New York City financial institution. But very soon there were people all across the country who were interested in what it was that the Working World had to offer in terms of a new model of cooperative development and financing that was not rooted in greed and maximizing profit, but instead was rooted in the idea of maximizing the benefit to the community. But he didn't want to do it in such a way as to create some large centralized organization where he would be the gatekeeper for huge amounts of resources going into communities. He wanted to make sure that the learnings of this work were spread and shared, and that people were able to do this in community through some democratic process. And it was in that light that he began meeting with a number of us, some of us who had been involved in the campus divestment movement and philanthropic divestment movements to remove certain assets from the harmful industries, particularly carbon-based petroleum industries, and put those resources to use in community. But what was missing from that movement was a clear image of how to put those resources to use in community. So it was in that regard that we began the work to develop Seed Commons as a national network of loan funds that are deeply local, rooted in local communities, but through the networking able to channel larger quantities of capital into our coffers, so that we end up sharing. We share three things. We share back office services, we share learnings, and we share capital. And now in a networked form, we have a national organization of more than 25 loan funds across the country at varying stages of development. Some of them have already begun lending, some of them are still in the learning stage, many of them are in the stage of helping to develop a local pipeline of people who are interested in doing this kind of non-extractive lending in their community. So let me say a little bit about what non-extractive finance is about. So many of the financial structures that exist right now are dependent on the collateral requirements and compounded interest rates to make sure that the investors who are part of the owners of such institutions bear essentially no risk in terms of how their money is allocated. They will talk about the fact that their money is put at risk, but in fact, often the collateral requirements mean that it kind of doesn't make any difference if you pay the loan back or not. Once they take your house and sell it, it will cover the debt of the loan, as well as the other penalty and interest and other kinds of things that are associated with it. So these collateral requirements, personal loan guarantees, compounding interest, are various ways that that the financing structure itself can be extracted. What this means is that more is taken out of a business, taken out of a community, than the value that is created on the basis of the lending process itself. The key to our non-extractive lending is that we never want to take more out of the community than the value that our lending helps to facilitate in the community. And we do this by, there's a kind of a technical way, we look at something called special net income, which is the cost of goods sold after the expenses that are paid. And we want to make sure that this special net income is greater than the cost of the money that people get, which is to say that people benefit from having engaged in the lending process. It has to exceed, the benefit that they engage in has to exceed the cost of paying back into the pool. And somebody once even asked me, well, why are you lending at all? Why don't you just give the money away? And it's because we want to make sure that resources are available, not just to the communities that we immediately work with, but the communities in the future. We want the money paid back so that we can lend it again, back into the community. We're not making ourselves rich through the process, not at all. But it is a regenerative thing, and it's because it's rooted in something we call productive sustainability, which is the idea that people are able to produce value with their efforts, that human labor goes into the production of products, or the securing of products and the transportation of products, the production of services that have a value that can be exchanged fairly, but that this human activity is what is creating that value. And as such, we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to create value. Some people think purely in terms of redistribution. Often we think about something that I like to refer to as productive justice, which is helping to give people the opportunity to be fully productive. Now, the existing system, which financializes everything and inverts the relationship between labor and human life and capital, one of the things that it does is it also distorts the very nature of community and the economic life in community. And it does this by coming up with the idea that the only thing that's important is the maximization of profit. If you take that the only thing important is the maximization of profit, then what you would end up doing is engaging in practices to make sure that you're always selling something, whether people need it or not. So there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into the whole marketing process where people are enticed to buy things, whether or not they need them. And even it goes so far as the distortion of the economy and the economic life by something that the creation of planned obsolescence, the idea that you want to make things that deliberately break so that people have to buy them again. And not only planned obsolescence, but also the way that style and fashion is created and done so that you can have perfectly usable clothing, but it's out of style. And if indeed it's out of style, then you don't want to be seen wearing it. And if you can't be seen wearing it, you obviously have to buy some more. And so now it might be that which was out of style this year comes back into style 2 years from now. But by that time, you've already gotten some new things and there's some other things that are in style as well. So we have a whole economy that is distorted by virtue of the fact that for some, the maximization of profit, not just the production of surplus through the course of our life, but the maximization of this is taken to be the ultimate good. And so our view is that, no, the purpose of the economy ought to be to meet people's needs and elevate the quality of life. And if we are to do this and do this well, we will end up creating the value that allows us to live together in community in such a way. I like the phrase that somebody used in one of the papers I was reading in preparation for this, talking about non-scarcity rather than abundance. It's not a question of just producing more and more, but making sure that people have as much as they need. I'm often thinking about somebody who might have $10 million. And someone said, well, you've got $1 million, you should be really happy. What do you plan to do with it? I plan to invest it. Oh, okay, well, why are you going to invest it? I'm going to invest it so I can get $1 billion, these $10 million. Well, if you had $10 million, what would you do with it? Well, I would invest it. Well, why would you invest the $10 million? So I could get $100 million. Oh, okay, well, if you had $100 million, what would you do with it? Oh, I would invest it. Why would you invest 100? So I can get $1 billion. Well, if you had $1 billion, what would you do with that? I would invest it. Why? So I could get $10 billion. It's like, well, when does this end? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. And if you think about it, on a finite planet, the idea of infinite accumulation is something that has an inherent problem. You can't have infinite accumulation on a finite planet without running into the challenge and the difficulties that we see with the ecological devastation that goes along with the ruin of cities and the alienation of communities, the planned obsolescence, the distortion of the economy. So we're trying to help create a different kind of economy, one that is, again, rooted in meeting people's needs and elevating the quality of life, and where we see democratic forms and democratic structures playing a role so that people are able to work together to collectively try to build for what it is that they need into the future and working together. And this requires, again, folks' engagement, not in such a way as to avoid paying their responsibilities, but so again, that the product of their labor, the people are compensated fairly for the product of their labor. And it goes into, again, strengthening and building of the community. So we have some work in the Philadelphia area. One of the groups we work with there is indeed PACA, the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. A number of people, they are one of the lending groups that is part of Seed Commons. Well, let me say a little bit more about the name to Seed Commons, why we talk about that. The whole commons, the whole seed metaphor is a way of thinking about some components of the lending process. A seed contains not only the DNA code, which tells it what kind of plant it's trying to grow, so that an apple seed, in fact, produces an apple and not a watermelon, but it also contains the initial packet of resources of food, often as stored as starch or as fat, that helps the seed in its initial stages of beginning to grow before it sinks roots deep enough into the soil to draw its nutrients from there. So that's what we end up doing with Seed Commons. We provide the initial packet of resources for business development at the same time that we are supplying the technical assistance, the equivalent of the DNA code, to the business. A lot of people in marginalized communities have had little access to opportunities to start businesses, and consequently the business skills that have developed in other communities. So part of our work is to be deliberate in terms of sharing business development tools with the people who are in communities, so that we can share more widely those tools and make them more equitably available beyond ourselves. So to us, the idea of the commons is very, very important as well, because the commons is kind of how we think of that shared pool of resources that needs to be available to all. Once upon a time, you know, the earth was organized along the lines of commons, where people had access to certain community resources that they managed together in such a way that it was utilized for the benefit of the community. At one point, that's what we had, and that's all we had, because all we needed. Other than that, human labor allows us to engage with each other and produce and sustain ourselves to make a living. Now, in the context of the commodification of everything, where everything is put up as something to be sold for the purpose, again, of maximizing profit, we see a situation where human value, human virtue is degraded in order to allow for the continued benefit of what is at this point a shrinking number of people in the world. So that's kind of what Seed Commons is and why it is. Again, we have made loans to more than 100 businesses in the United States. I think something in the order of 8,000 people have benefited from our lending. Approximately $20 million in lending has taken place through our efforts. And we are constantly looking for ways to grow our network according to our capacity. We want to make sure that new people that are drawn into the network have the opportunity to benefit from the network, much as the old folks who have been in the network for a while have. And so we're very careful about not wanting to exceed our capacity as we draw in people into this process. But we're always looking for additional resources so that we can make those resources available in community. And on the basis of this, help create additional opportunities for people to themselves be productive and engage in wholesome ways of making their communities better places to live. And with that, I would kind of like to answer some questions. I'm available as long as we need. If indeed I have sparked some interest, hopefully we will have some questions there I can help answer.
I definitely do. So I'm going to start off with a couple if people don't mind. And if you guys want to either raise your hands in Zoom or enter a question in the chat, we can do Q&A either way. So I'll keep an eye out for both of those. I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit more about the significance of the member loan. You called them loan clubs being cooperatives, and how the concept of a cooperative is meaningful in the Seed Commons network and what exactly a cooperative means. And I also wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more to who Seed Commons typically gets money from and who's the typical investor that's investing, and who's the typical loan beneficiary. And if you have any examples from the Philadelphia area, from PACA, that would be great. If not, maybe that's another event for us to have with a representative from PACA in Philadelphia as well. I think that would help us get an idea of how, what exactly Seed Commons is doing and how it's working in the communities and with who.
Okay, very good. Now, the cooperative, we taken together our cooperative, we are, because we're made up of a number of different individual loan funds that they're working together, work cooperatively to share in resources, to share in governance. We lend into a cooperative economy, which we try to lend into people building businesses either as worker cooperatives, where the workers are the owners of the business, or in some occasions we have lent into consumer cooperatives, where the consumers of the business are the owners of the business and share in the ownership. And on some occasions we have lent into housing cooperatives, where people who are resident share in the governing of it and the benefits of it. The reason we care about cooperatives, again, is that the interdependence that was being mentioned earlier, is something that's very important to us. We live together in the world, and we can make the world better together. We're not necessarily trying to make the largest, we're not trying to, again, maximize profits. And so these cooperative efforts are democratically owned and democratically governed, which means that it means they have a lot of meetings, quite honestly, because you can't build an organization and actually allow people to have a say in it without spending a lot of time talking with each other, meeting with each other, and deciding things together. Thinking together is the way I like to think about the essence of democracy. It's when we think together and are able to come up with something better than that which we would have come up with individually. In addition, though, there's still requirements of leadership, where those people who are paying attention to the process as a whole still have a responsibility, but they don't have to do it alone. You know, one of the things we tell people when they start talking about, well, you know, I don't want to share in a business. It's like, yeah, but together, again, we're stronger than we are individually. And if there are people who are working with you on the project, then you probably will find ways of being able to enhance and build the project better. So again, the essence of the cooperative that we're talking about is shared ownership and shared governance in something that's organized in order to meet needs that have been identified. The United States has an interesting cooperative history. There are certain communities that some people think of as not being interested in co-ops. And some people, cooperatives, you know, only means the fancy natural food co-op. These are stored down the block. But the actual life of cooperatives and mutual aid, you know, are part of how people have met their needs in periods of adversity, when existing structures and social services have not been available. So that the dispossessed people coming out of the end of the tragic period of slavery in this country found ways of meeting to and working together collaboratively and build economic structure during that time period. So we say that anybody and everybody can and needs to build cooperatives. We try to spend our effort mainly working in what we describe as marginalized communities. These are communities that have been left out of the economic mainstream, where people have a lot of needs that are not being met. And through the efforts in these marginalized communities, we're again trying to share lessons and tools for business development that would otherwise not be available. Typically, the investors are people who have who some of them need to preserve their capital. Others are willing and in a position to give it away. We take some of our resources in the form of grants, but we don't give away money to the businesses we're developing. We're hoping that we develop sustainable businesses. What we try to do with the grant money is use it to pay for the infrastructure required for doing this lending in community. So we're always on the lookout for grant monies to use for that purpose, in addition to some investment money that can be used for the purpose of making loans available. Some other do, as you can imagine, the securities considerations. I'm not in position to solicit investments. That there are people in seed commons who spend a lot of time and doing that and doing it very well. So if you look on the website and send an inquiry, if you're interested in investing, then Brendan Martin or Marnie Thompson would be likely to get in touch with you. But our investors, you know, there's a wide range of people. Some of them are involved in the tech industry. Some of them have inherited wealth that they got from their families. Some of them are people who, you know, simply want to put their money to some good use. Some are the people who had been previously involved in the divestment, you know, seeking some alternate use of their resources to take them out of fossil fuel industry. We have a range of investors. Right now, we're not doing crowdsourcing investments. And typically, I think our smallest investors are something I think it's in the neighborhood of $25,000 for most investors. Some people have come in with larger sums of money than that, you know, when they can and have them available.
What we have a couple of questions in the chat. So what is a typical loan size? And I had asked who would a typical loan beneficiary be? Are they people who want to start businesses, or what, you know, what is a typical opportunity that Seed Commons is looking at as far as a loan? And then a second question on the chat is, how do you collect the loans from the cooperatives, and do you charge interest?
Yeah, well, part of how we collect the loans is that we are hyper local. In other words, we have local loan funds in the local community that end up knowing the people that are borrowed from and have been engaged typically with the people in providing technical assistance to the people who are borrowing. Um, we charge some interest, but the interest is not compounded. The interest accrues based on the idea again that we're trying to recoup from the lending process the actual cost of lending. So we want to be able to lend in such a way that that revenues will be able to pay for us to do it, so that we as an organization are not continuously dependent on philanthropy and large donors. But again, while the interest accrues, it is not compounded. We don't charge people interest on interest. We charge simple interest. For a lot of, we do business lending into cooperative businesses. And a couple of things I like to say about that. There are a lot of financial institutions that won't lend to co-ops because they don't know whose house to take. In other words, it's something that's collaboratively owned. You got to figure out, whose house to come after if the loan falters. We don't have that problem because we're not going to take anybody's house. The other thing is that we are what I would call equity-like lenders. We have direct hands-on connection with the people that borrow from us. Again, we want to make sure that the technical assistance is provided to allow people to make good benefit of the loans that they secure. So we're lending to businesses, we're lending to cooperative businesses. The cooperative business can be a worker co-op, can be a housing co-op, it can be a consumer co-op. There would need to be a cooperative business of some type. We're mainly lending in marginalized communities. So I think some 90% of our money has gone to businesses that are what I think the current catchphrase is BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color businesses. Large numbers of them go into people into inner city communities that again don't have much access to other loan resources, and particularly not for business activity. Lots of folks want to give out consumer loans to help people with this process of this consumerism that I was just talking about earlier. But we're mainly engaged in allowing people to get productive loans for business development, which are much, much harder to secure.
Mm-hmm. And I think I recall reading that you don't charge any interest and don't actually take any repayments if a business isn't making any profit, isn't
Right.
So you only get repaid if the business is quote unquote successful, correct?
That is absolutely true. And so again, we have a number on paper of the accrued interest, but if you don't actually if your business fails, then we don't collect it. We won't ever get it. If your business succeeds, we do want to get it in such a way as, again, to help us pay for the cost of lending so that we can help make resources available to other people in the future. But yeah, we don't require repayment if it's not a successful business. And the repayment comes again as a portion of the special net income, which is to say that the repayment comes out of the surplus that is created by the business.
That's great. We have a couple more questions in the chat. Someone asks, can you mention companies that have benefited from Seed Commons loans?
Yeah, I can do a few. We've made a loan and helped with part of the expansion of CHCA, which is the largest worker cooperative in the country. It's there in Bronx, New York. We do that. That was a big thing. On the other hand, we also lend to a small group of immigrant community group in Western North Carolina called Emma Poder that is trying to secure some manufactured housing communities in order to build it as a housing cooperative so that they can deal with the rapid gentrification of the area that was beginning to price people out of the loans, out of a home. We've made resources available to New Era Windows Company. This was a windows company that you might have heard of in Chicago that had to go on a sit-down strike, one of the first ones in recent history when a business was going out of business and failed to pay people their severance pay at the end, or it didn't want to pay people their currently owed payroll checks. It just said, sorry, we're closing up. And so the workers took over the business and occupied it. This happened to them twice before finally some folks came in and said, look, why don't we help you organize this as a worker co-op? You'll own it yourself. And if there's anyone that cheat you, it would have to be you, and we don't expect you to cheat yourself. So New Era's Window Company, remains one of the businesses that we have supported. There are a number of people in Baltimore. There is a whole ecosystem of businesses that have developed around something that was called Red Emma's, which is a cooperative bookstore and coffee shop, vegan cooperative bookstore coffee shop there in Baltimore that has been growing and helping to spur the development of a number of other cooperative businesses. A women's run coffee roaster business, which is one of the few of them in the country. A bicycle shop, an excellent, incredible ice cream company called Taharka Brothers that manufactures really, really good ice cream there in Philadelphia. It's not in Philadelphia, this is in Baltimore, Taharka Brothers. They did very well during the panic because it was able to do ice cream deliveries with the truck that had been secured or repaired, by some of the lending that we did. And this had Taharka Brothers started out as a nonprofit organization, but it grew and developed as a worker cooperative. So there's a flower shop in the Hudson Valley. There's some farm workers in the north, in the northwest. We have begun working with CJA, the Climate Justice Alliance, and one of the loans that they helped secure was for a business that builds agricultural housing on the East Coast in the Maryland Eastern Shore area. There are a range of different things. There's another bike shop out in Richmond, California, in the Chevron area called Rich City Rides. There's one in Los Angeles that is developing. A lot of people are in the process of trying to identify other business development ideas in their area where someone has the passion and the understanding of it enough to want to do it as a business, and is interested in trying to figure out how to do it as a cooperative business, for which our cooperative lending is particularly useful.
That's great. What is a typical loan size?
The loan size range from, a small loan. We're able to lend in Guam. So we just approved a loan for some people in Guam of, I think, $10,000 for something called a refillery. This is where people come and bring their own bottles and containers to have them refilled with household products. And this was a small loan just for the purpose of purchasing inventory. So on the other hand, one of the loans in North Carolina to the immigrant community looking to buy an entire trailer park and stabilize its housing conditions was over $1 million. Wow. So that they range from small to large. Some of the smaller lending we do has an almost experimental nature to it. And we're making the loan for the purpose of trying to identify, is the business indeed a viable business? And those would tend to be smaller loans because we don't necessarily have all the research information that's required for knowing whether or not it's going to be successful. And in the course of that, we allow people to do some experimentation, say on our dime, so that we are able to supply the resources to actually find out if there is a viable market for some commodity that someone is interested in producing.
Very cool. And we have another question. How do potential recipients of these loans learn about the availability of the resource of your loans?
Again, most of our loan funds are what we call hyper-local. They are people who are rooted in community and have personal relationships with the people who end up being the borrowers. There are often events that are sometimes sponsored by local communities for the purpose of offering people, an opportunity to hear about the possibility of having some assistance for some business development idea that they had. And so this, there are a range of different kinds of activities that people engage in. But again, there was a question that someone said, how do you collect from people? You do way better in collecting from folks if you actually have a personal relationship with them than you do when you're talking about people that you don't know, you only have a commercial financial relationship with them. There are people who would borrow money kind of under the pretense of, I hope I don't ever have to pay this back. But if indeed you're working with some people that you care about, that you work with closely, then instead the thing is, we want to make sure we pay this back. So, well, one, it gives us a right to borrow again. And two, this is part of how we help our community, make more opportunities available for other people in the community.
And I have another question too. As a synagogue, we're not a wealthy community. We're a small synagogue with, I don't even know how many members we have now, maybe 100, 150 family units. But we have recently, worked to divest our endowment and, the money that we hold in accounts from any fossil fuel based and, other filters for, values-based investing. 170. Someone just wrote a note in the chat. We have 170 family units. And what would you, based on your experience in this area, think that we as a community, and also we and they're saying and growing, we as a community and also as individuals, just living in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, should be thinking about when we're looking to, invest our money either at the let's tackle the individual level and also at the synagogue level. What are you have any suggestions?
No, that's really kind of up to you all to think about how much you would like to contribute to and be a part of this effort. Again, the people who are actually likely to solicit investments would be, people who again have gone through the security clearance to do so, not Securities and Exchange Commission kind of thing.
Right.
On the other hand, we're able to take donations of any size. That if you feel so moved and are able to donate, that money goes to, again, the support of the infrastructure required for us to have in place to do the lending, the back office services, to pay for people to be working in community as loan officers. And we're able to accept, we are a 501c3 and are able to accept tax deductible donations toward this effort of any size. But again, the exact size and structure of investments are something that you would need to talk to the people who are handling the investment part of it. But we would certainly appreciate whatever level of support that you're able to give to these efforts if, again, you are so moved and feel this to be something that would be within the realm of what you're able to do.
Do you know other networks or organizations that are working also on other aspects of, developing in, non-traditional and non-extractive financing models that we could learn from?
There's certainly there's a network of lenders that lend into cooperative economies. Some of them do it in different ways. There's a cooperative fund in New England, but it doesn't have our same kind of non-extractive from the standpoint of not requiring repayment of the loans. In fact, told me one time that that would just never fly with their investment committee. On the other hand, they are, part of the overall ecosystem of people looking to help support a cooperative economy, and as such, we value them as our friends.
Sure.
Trying to think, actually doing non-extractive lending, there's a whole world of CDFIs, community development financial institutions, that were created, I guess began with some bill passed in 1994 that helped create the CDFIs that are funded by the Treasury Department. We are indeed a CDFI, and as such, we're able to secure some of those CDFI resources to do lending. But again, we like to think of ourselves as stretching the limits of what is available through those sources of finance, because a lot of people, in spite of the fact that they have pretty cheap money from the federal government to lend, still require some pretty rigorous lending requirements that have not indeed opened up the availability of resources to the most marginal communities that it might otherwise be available to. So
That's a great point.
Again, that's growing and expanding. We are a CDFI, and we'll have some resources that are available through that. Currently, we have something like about $20 million. We're about a $20 million loan fund. We're looking to get some big new investment. And when this happens, we'll be in a position to look at larger projects in a number of areas around the country where the needs greatly exceed our tiny capacity to meet them. And
Sure.
we're always looking for a way to have more resources available to put back in the community.
Sure. I see that Norma has her hand up. Norma, what's your question?
My question is, what was the name of the immigrant housing co-op that you started? How much money was involved in that? Could that also be, could refugees, could we possibly, because a number of us from the faith communities here are working with resettling refugees, and we have families resettled and some coming. And the big problem for them is they never have anything but a rental forever. They never have their own place. And it would be lovely if we could set up a small program that would subsidize them to be able to own their own property at some point. I mean, that just came to me today by listening to what you were saying. So I would love to be able to do a little follow-up. I mean, how much was the immigrant program you had, like big, not small, or was it small?
This one was, this was a pretty big loan. It was over $1 million. I mean, they purchased something in excess of a relatively small mobile home park, about 25 units, and it cost about $1 million. So the key to any and all of this is the level of organizing and organizational structures and preparations done in the community. That group of folks have been working on immigrants' rights issues for a number of years, and have put themselves into a position of having a core of folks that knew each other, worked with each other, trusted each other around money. These were people who had been engaged in savings clubs with each other. And as such, they were in a position to provide the needed services to each other to handle operating the housing as a business. So you would need to do some organizing work among the refugee group, but that would certainly be a possibility that if there was a project that people had identified and an organized group of folks to actually end up, with the ownership structure of it, that could sound like a very, very beautiful project that you might be engaged in.
Great
Okay,
idea,
good.
Norma.
Because we do have good, we already have a good communication and organization. It's very small though. We're only talking, we have 2 families, 2 immigrant minors, but we're planning on getting Afghan families coming in. So it would be something that would be starting and could evolve in the future. And
Yeah.
25 isn't so big, but I would say if we had 5 families, that gives me an idea of how we could perhaps get housing for 5 families. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Maybe 6.
I would guess that some of the people in PACA might very well be interested in helping you think through the, organizing requirement of putting together some kind of a cooperative structure to help meet that need.
What was the name of the group that you said that would help? I'm sorry.
That's PACA. That's what
Pa-
he was, the Philadelphia.
PACA.
Yeah.
That's the
And
area.
I have a feeling that since we've mentioned them a couple times here, maybe that's our next guest speaker for a follow-up event here after we talk to Ed. I think it sounds like maybe it makes sense to invite PACA to come and speak with us to let us know a little bit more about what they're doing in the Philadelphia area. So that sounds like a great opportunity there.
That sounds nice to me.
Okay, great.
I'm sure it'll be very interesting.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. Does anyone else have a question, want to raise their hand or anything like that? I think I've hit all the questions in the chat so far. Anybody? No? All right, well, I wanted to just kind of circle back around and close up. I love, Ed, that you talked a little bit about the issue of our current value system and our current economic system of planned obsolescence and the need to maximize, basically using GDP as the main and only measurement of a successful economy. And so we have in our congregation this year also another effort, the Buy Nothing campaign that we're trying to highlight also, which is trying to combat that ever growing and incessant, drumming in our head to go out and buy more things. And to use more of the Buy Nothing community networks and free cycle networks, and maybe wear that out of style clothing, even if it's out of style, and to not buy so many new things and be satisfied with the often very plentiful amount of things that we already all have. So I wanted to remind everyone about that, and we have resources on our Google Drive about the Buy Nothing campaign as well. And I also loved how you talked about that as well, and how, Seed Commons' purpose of the economy should be to meet needs and elevate the quality of life. I watched an awesome TED Talk, which I hope that you've seen, that highlighted, it was an economist that was talking about how we should measure the economy not in GDP, but in happiness. And so I can try and share that link if I can find it again to everybody after the event. I thought that was a great TED Talk that kind of highlights the fact that maybe our values are a little skewed in our society. And I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today. If no one has any other questions, Ed, I wanted to really thank you for your talk. It was so inspiring and really eye-opening to talk about and learn about other options for ways that we can help our community members and other people in our society get access to capital that may not usually have it, and work together as a community, God forbid, to help everybody and lift all boats. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us on a Sunday.
Was that too short?
Say that again?
Was it too short?
No, I don't think
No,
so at
perfect.
all.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
It's
no,
perfect.
definitely not. I think it was wonderful. And thank you so much. I'll be sending out some resources after this to everybody and some links. And so Ed, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I have a feeling a few people might want to pick your brain with some other questions down the road, if that's okay with you.
Okay, that'd be fine.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Have a great evening.
You all take care and have a great day. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks. Talk to everyone soon. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Organizing, Dara. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Dara. That was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Looks like Howard, oh, there we go.